Tonight, you're not just falling asleep. You're beginning a journey, a quiet, moonlit walk through ancient paths. As the night deepens, let the sounds of forgotten millstones, fading oil lamps, and slow footsteps guide you through a world long gone. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these gentle stories from the past, tap subscribe, leave a soft comment, and share this with someone who needs rest tonight. Your quiet support helps keep this sleepy journey going. Now close your eyes, slow your breathing, and come with me to a time when the wheel turned slowly and history whispered you to sleep. This is what if you woke up in cave of seven sleepers as you are one of them. You awaken in Ephesus, not the Ephesus of today, with its scattered ruins and quiet tourist footpaths, but the living, breathing city of the mid-3rd century. The air smells faintly of the sea, the port still operates then, before the silt from the Caister River will one day choke it into stillness. The harbor is lined with ships, grain barges from Egypt, merchant vessels from the Black Sea, and fishing boats returning from the Aegean with their morning catch. The wharf is noisy but not chaotic. A Roman port city moves with the confidence of habit, its routines as steady as the tides. Your sandals press into sun-warmed stone as you walk along Arcadian Street, the great colonnaded avenue that cuts a line from the harbor to the theater. Marble pillars rise on either side, white as bone in the midday light. Between the colonnades, shop fronts open to the street basket weavers, spice merchants, and bakers whose ovens breathe out warm, yeasty air. You pass a store where men sit in the shade, speaking low about politics. One leans in and murmurs a name, Decius. It is spoken cautiously, for this emperor has become a figure both feared and resented. In the year 249 AD, Gaius Messius Quintus Decius took the imperial throne and with it brought a wave of laws aimed at tightening the old Roman religion. The empire was vast, stretching from Britain to the deserts of Arabia, but it was uneasy. A century of instability had left cracks in its political foundations, and emperors sought unity through tradition that meant loyalty to the gods of Rome. The decree was simple in wording but heavy in consequence. Every citizen of the empire was to offer sacrifice to the Roman gods and the well being of the emperor. Those who complied would receive a certificate, the libellus. Those who refused would be treated as enemies of the state. In Ephesus, a city still filled with the grandeur of its pagan past, the edict stirred a quiet dread among the growing Christian community. Christianity was not yet the dominant faith. It would become in later centuries. Here in the 3rd century, it was a scattered and sometimes hidden fellowship, meeting in private homes or discreetly in the edges of the city. The law placed them in an impossible position: betray their faith with public sacrifice, or face punishment that could range from fines and imprisonment to death. You are among a group of young men who refuse, not soldiers, not officials, but ordinary citizens, though from families of some standing. Tradition will later give you names: Maximilian, Malchus, Martinian, Dionysius, John, Serapion, and Constantine. These names are passed down through centuries of retelling, their exact origins blurred, yet they stand in the memory of believers as the Seven Sleepers. The first days after the edict are tense but quiet. Christians are summoned to make their offerings. Some comply under duress, others disappear into the countryside. Your group chooses a different path. For now, you remain in the city, living in the narrow lanes away from the harbor's bustle. Life continues in its dull rhythms even under the shadow of threat. Bread is bought in the morning, carts of amphorae roll over the paving stones. In the evenings, the smell of oil lamps and cooking lentils fills the streets, but the city watches. In a place like Ephesus, where the grand temple of Artemis still dominates the skyline and the civic pride is rooted in its pagan heritage. Refusal to sacrifice is more than religious defiance, it is seen as an insult to the city itself. The pressure grows. Roman officials begin to call for arrests, not in sweeping raids, but in the slow, methodical way bureaucracies prefer. Names are written, witnesses speak, soldiers arrive at doors. One evening, in the shaded courtyard of a friend's home, the 7 of you meet in low voices. You speak of what is to come, a trial perhaps, or worse. You know of others in Smyrna, in Pergamum, who have been executed. There is talk of making a final stand, of openly declaring your faith before the governor. But there is also the question of whether such defiance serves any purpose but your own pride. The oldest among you, Maximilian, speaks of retreat, not as surrender but as waiting. The empire will change, he says. It always does. but we must live to see it. It is decided. You will leave the city. Not tonight, not in panic, but in the measured way that draws no attention. A small parcel of food will be prepared, cloaks for the chill of the Anatolian night, and there is a place known to some of you from childhood wanderings, a cave. In the hills beyond the city's edge, it will serve as shelter until the worst passes. In the days before departure, life takes on a strange slowness. The simplest tasks feel weighted with finality. You walk the marble streets knowing you may never see them again. The baths, the market, the shaded courtyards all seem sharpened in memory. Even the mundane becomes worth noticing. The rhythm of a potter's wheel, the slow turning of a merchant's scale, the way sunlight reflects from polished limestone. On the morning you leave, the city is already warming under the sun. You walk not as fugitives, but as travelers, a calculated deception. The road out of Ephesus winds through groves of olive trees, their leaves turning silver in the wind. The sound of the city fades, replaced by the call of birds and the faint ringing of goat bells from distant pastures. The cave lies beyond the cultivated fields, in the low hills that rise toward the mountains. It is not a grand place, just a dark mouth in the stone, half hidden by brush. You had played here as boys, hiding from the midday sun, never imagining it might one day become a refuge from the empire itself. Inside, the air is cool with the faint smell of earth and stone. It is dry, which is good. You will need to keep food and firewood safe from dampness. The light fades quickly beyond the entrance, and you know that soon you will need to choose whether to keep a fire for warmth and cooking or remain unseen in darkness. That night you eat bread and dried figs in the dim glow of a small lamp. The city feels far away, though you know it lies only a few miles behind you. You speak in low voices, remembering the streets, the harbor, the people you left behind. The world outside the cave feels paused, as if holding its breath. You intend to stay here only a few days, a week at most. The trouble in Ephesus will pass, and you will return quietly to your lives. You cannot know not yet that the next time you walk its streets, the city will not be the same Ephesus at all. What you also cannot know is that the empire itself will shift and fall, rise again in different forms, and that you will not see the passing of years in the way other men do. For now, there is only the cave, the cool stone against your back, and the sense that time here moves differently, slower, quieter, and with an indifference to the affairs of emperors. Yet, as the last lamp goes out and you lie in the darkness, you cannot help but wonder, what if the world beyond the cave changes in ways you could never imagine? Section 2. When centuries drift past, the first night in the cave is quiet. You do not yet understand that it will be the last night you measure in ordinary human terms. Morning comes, or seems to, but there is no rush to rise. The entrance admits only a narrow shaft of light, and inside the cool darkness, time feels dulled at the edges. The body adjusts to stillness. You breathe the same air as your companions, hear their movements, their occasional whispers, but there is little else. You try to mark the hours by the rhythm of hunger, but even that becomes uncertain. Sleep comes easily in the dimness. You wake not knowing if it has been minutes or days. The city beyond will you rest in the hills. Ephesus continues in its slow routines. The decree of Decius still presses on the city's Christians. Some comply, others are punished, but the wheel of commerce turns regardless. Ships unload their grain and wine. The baths fill with the chatter of citizens. The marble avenues remain busy under the Anatolian sun, yet even in the empire change is constant. Decius himself will not live long in the year 251 AD, barely 2 years into his reign he is killed in battle against the Goths in the marshes of Abritus. A new emperor rises, then another, each inheriting an empire both vast and fragile. From the perspective of the cave, these shifts mean nothing. No messenger arrives to tell you of Decius' death. No friend comes to say that the edict has been softened. You remain in darkness, unaware that the urgency of your escape has already begun to fade in the minds of those who once pursued you. Seasons without witnessed hills outside the cave change with the seasons. In spring, wildflowers press against the entrance, their colors unseen by you but fragrant enough to reach inside. In summer, the stones grow hot beneath the Anatolian sun, and the air outside trembles with heat. Autumn brings a faint scent of crushed olives from distant groves, while winter lays a thin frost across the entrance, brittle and silent. These cycles turn again and again. How many times? You could not count even if you tried. In the Roman world, Years are counted carefully, consuls' names mark them, historians record them, but for you inside the cave there is no such reckoning. The concept of year dissolves. There is only the unbroken continuity of darkness, the slow breathing of your companions, and the steady, indifferent presence of stone. The empire moves on beyond your hiding place. The empire bends and shifts. By the close of the 3rd century, Diocletian rises to power, reorganizing the administration into the tetrarchy ruled by 4 emperors to better manage the sprawling territories. Cities are fortified. Taxes are standardized. The imperial bureaucracy thickens. The persecution of Christians reaches one of its most intense phases under his reign. Then, as swiftly as a storm passes, the policy reverses. Constantine the Great will later legalize Christianity with the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. From then on, the faith you once hid for will begin to hold the favor of emperors themselves. None of this reaches you. The world beyond the hills changes leaders, laws, and languages, but inside the cave the conditions remain the same: cool, dim, unbroken. Centuries in silent. Stone is a patient companion. It does not hurry. The rock around you has stood for millions of years. It will remain long after you are gone. In its presence, the difference between a day and a decade seems almost meaningless. Somewhere outside the great temple to Artemis, pride of Ephesus for centuries, begins its slow decline. Pagan rites continue for a time, but with Christianity rising in influence, the temple's central role in the city's life diminishes. Trade routes shift. The harbor silts further. By the 6th century, the once great port will lie far from the sea, its ships gone, its streets quieter. You, in your sleep, miss all of this: the slow decay, the political debates, the building of new churches atop older foundations. The passing of generations. Generation of Ephesian citizens are born, live, and die without ever knowing of the 7 who once fled into the hills. Your families fade into memory, then into obscurity. If any speak of you at all, it is in hushed tones, perhaps a rumor that you escaped, perhaps a warning told to children about the fate of those who defy imperial orders. The language shifts subtly over centuries. The Latin spoken in official decrees mixes with the Greek of daily commerce, and the accents of the city evolve. Even the clothes, the coins, the shape of amphorae all change while you lie unmoving in the dark. The quiet outside the cave. In the later centuries, the empires troubles grow. Invaders press from the east and north. Earthquakes occasionally shake the land. One such tremor, sometime in the 5th century, cracks part of the hills where your cave lies. For a moment, dust trickles down in the darkness. Perhaps you stir in your sleep, sensing something, but the silence closes over again. The people of Ephesus no longer look to the temple for protection. Instead, they pray in the grand basilicas that now dominate the city. The cross has replaced the laurel as the emblem of authority, and somewhere in this transformed world, the story of the 7 sleepers is told but as legend, not as living fact. Those who speak of it believe you died long ago, martyrs to an old persecution. A world unrecognizable. By the early 6th century, when the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire is ruled from Constantinople, Ephesus is a quieter place. The sea is distant, the once busy harbor now an empty plain. Merchants travel by road rather than ship. The city's population has dwindled, and its grandeur is a shadow of its former self. Yet it is into this altered world that you will one day step, waking as if no time has passed. The air, the streets, the very language will feel strange. The empire you once feared will no longer exist in the form you knew, for now, though that moment lies ahead, in the darkness of the cave, nothing signals that the world outside has been utterly remade. You rest in a stillness that has outlasted emperors, wars, and entire generations. The centuries have passed, the world waits. But when you wake, will you understand that nearly 300 years have slipped away? Or will you still believe it is the morning after you first lay down in the cave? Section 3. Waking into a new world. You open your eyes to the dim gray of the cave's entrance. At first, you think only that you have slept too long, perhaps through the morning, perhaps even into the next day. Your body feels oddly rested, the kind of deep rest that erases all sense of time. Around you, your companions stir. Some sit up, rubbing their eyes. Others reach for the small sacks of bread you left near the wall. The loaves are dry, harder than you remember, but in your hunger you eat without question. The air feels fresher, as if a breeze is reaching deeper into the cave than before. You notice small details you cannot quite explain, the way the light slants differently through the entrance, the faint smell of grass where you once remembered dry dust, the first steps outside stepping out of the cave. The world feels sharper, cleaner, somehow brighter. The path you remember is still there, but the brush has grown thick along its edges. You walk slowly, half expecting to see the familiar outlines of the city as you left it, the marble columns of the Arcadian street, the shimmer of the harbor in the sun, but something is wrong. The harbor is gone. In its place stretches a plain, green and uneven, dotted with grazing animals. You blink, wondering if the sea has receded for some temporary reason, but the truth presses against your thoughts. This is no temporary change. A changed city. When you enter the outskirts of Ephesus, the change is undeniable. The streets are narrower, patched with uneven stone. Many buildings you remember have crumbled or vanished entirely. Where once stood the grand temple of Artemis, you see only a scattering of broken columns, their carved capitals lying in the grass. You look for the busy markets, the cries of fishmongers, the polished marble facades of public buildings. Instead, you find smaller shops, their signs marked with unfamiliar symbols, the cross now painted where once you saw the Roman eagle, and the people. Their clothes are different, their Greek tinged with strange inflections. They glance at you as if you are travelers from far away. You hear no mention of Decius, no whisper of the persecution that once drove you into hiding. The coin that betrays Timeu. Decide to buy bread from a stall, reaching into your pouch. You hand the vendor a coin, one you have carried since the day you fled. The man takes it, turns it in his fingers, and frowns. He calls over another, who examines it with open curiosity. The coin bears the image of an emperor whose reign is to them an ancient memory. They ask where you found it. When you answer simply that it is from last week, they exchange glances that carry something between suspicion and wonder. Word spreads quickly. A small crowd gathers. Some make the sign of the cross. Others murmur about prophecy. You hear the name Theodosius spoken, a name unknown to you. Summoned to the bishop, you are brought before the bishop of the city. He is an old man dressed in simple robes, yet the authority in his voice is unmistakable. He asks where you have been, how long you have hidden. When you explain that you fled the persecution under Decius and have been in the hills for a few days, he studies you with a mixture of pity and awe. The bishop tells you the truth gently, as though speaking to children. Nearly 3 centuries have passed since Decius ruled. The empire has changed its face. Christianity is now not only legal but honored. Churches stand where temples once dominated. The emperor himself professes the faith you once risked your life to defend. The date he gives you, the year 538 by the calendar of the empire, feels like an impossible number. Your mind tries to place it against your last memory, but there is no way to bridge the gap. The weight of the centuries. It is not only the city that has changed, the world itself feels older, slower, as though worn smooth by time. None of your family remains. Their names survive only, if at all, in the genealogies of strangers. The friends you once knew have long since turned to dust, and yet you live as though time spared you while consuming everything else. The people of Ephesus treat you as a living sign, a miracle. They speak of you in the same breath as they speak of saints and martyrs. The story spreads to the emperor, who comes to meet you, bowing his head in reverence. You are not sure how to respond to this honor. You had not set out to be a legend, only to survive. The return to the cave. In the days that follow, you return to the cave, drawn as if by a thread. The city is too strange, its sounds and faces unfamiliar. The cave, though dark and silent, is unchanged. Here, the stone still holds the same cool air, the same stillness as before. Some say you enter once more and do not return, passing quietly from life in the place where you first sought refuge. Others say you live for a short while in the new Ephesus, speaking to pilgrims who come to hear your tale, before at last surrendering to rest. History records no certain ending. The legend lives on in time. The story of the seven sleepers is told across the empire in Greek, Latin, Syriac, Arabic. It will appear in the writings of Christian bishops, in the Quran, and in folk tales from Spain to Central Asia. The details will shift with each telling, the names, the length of sleep, even the number of sleepers, but the heart of it remains the same, that in an age of persecution, a group of young men took refuge in a cave and woke centuries later into a transformed world. Some will debate whether it is history or allegory, miracle or myth. But for you, the memory is simple. The warmth of the sun on the morning you left the city, the cool darkness of the cave, and the bewildering brightness of the day you awoke. 309 years passed while you slept, empires rose and fell, faiths shifted, cities changed their faces, the harbor dried, the temple crumbled, languages evolved, and in the end you learned that time is not something you can measure only in days and years. It is a force that can remake the world. Entirely so that when you wake, you may find yourself not in the place you left, but in a place you can no longer fully know. Story 2: The Monks of Mount Athos, a Millennium of Seclusion. Section 1: The Peninsula of Silence. The Aegean Sea laps quietly against the stony shoreline. If you stand on the western coast of the Mount Athos Peninsula at dawn, you will hear only the low sigh of the water and the occasional call of a seabird. The sun rises over the mountains, throwing its first light on a steep spine of forested hills. There are no towns here, no marketplaces, no fishing fleets setting out for the day. This is not by accident. For more than 1,000 years, this place has been the domain of monks. The modern world may exist beyond the horizon, but within these 20 kilometers of rugged land, time obeys a different order, the order of prayer, of seasons, and of the long patience of stone walls. The shape of the land. Mount Athos is a peninsula of northern Greece, the easternmost of the three fingers that jut into the Aegean. It rises sharply from the sea, its peak over 2,000 meters, often shrouded in cloud. The slopes are cloaked in chestnut, oak, and pine. In the higher reaches, bare rock juts out like the bones of the earth. Paths wind through the forest, narrow and stony, linking monasteries to one another. These monasteries are not clustered like a village. Each sits apart, often on its own outcrop or tucked into a fold of the hillside facing the sea. Between them are small skeets, smaller communities and solitary hermitages clinging to cliffs where the stone seems to drop directly into the water. There are no cars here. Travel is by foot, mule, or boat. The pace is slow by necessity. The rule of seclusion. The seclusion of Athos is not merely tradition, it is law. Since the 11th century, an imperial charter known as the Chrysaor has governed life here. No women are permitted on the peninsula, a rule known as the Avaton. The intent is not merely to maintain celibacy, but to preserve an unbroken focus on spiritual life. Even female animals, with few exceptions, like cats for controlling rodents, are prohibited. Visitors are allowed only with special permission, and even then the number is strictly limited. Those who arrive are often pilgrims, drawn by the reputation of Athos as the holy mountain. But the majority who live here do so permanently, having left behind the outside world. Once a man becomes a monk here, he may not leave without reason. The peninsula becomes his entire world, its rocky paths, his roads, its churches, his cities, its gardens, his fields. The rhythm of the day. If you lived here, your day would not be measured by the standard clock. Time on Mount Athos is often kept according to the Byzantine system, in which the day begins at sunset. This means that hours shift with the seasons, a natural rhythm tied to the movement of the sun. Before dawn, the bells ring for orthros, the morning prayer service. Monks gather in the dim light of the Catholic on the main church standing for hours as chants in Byzantine Greek rise and fall. Candles flicker against gilded icons. The air is heavy with incense. After the service, there is work. Each monk has an obedience, a task assigned by the monastery. Some tend vegetable gardens on terraced slopes, others care for goats or bees. Some copy manuscripts by hand in the scriptorium, a tradition that stretches back to the early centuries of the monastery's existence. Meals are simple: bread, olives, legumes, sometimes fish. Meat is not eaten. Meals are taken in silence, broken only by the voice of a reader reciting from the lives of the saints. A history of retreat. The roots of Athos' monastic tradition stretch back to the early Byzantine era. In the 9th century, hermits began to settle in caves and makeshift huts on the peninsula. By the 10th century, organized monasteries were established, the most prominent being the Great Lavra, founded in 963 by Saint Athanasius the Athonite with the support of Emperor Nicephorus II. Focus. From the very beginning, Athos was granted special privileges by the Byzantine emperors: exemption from taxation, self-governance under the authority of the monks themselves, and protection from secular interference. These privileges allowed the monastic community to survive through centuries of political upheaval. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, Athos did not vanish. It adapted, paying taxes to the Sultan but otherwise continuing its quiet existence. Even during periods of hardship, the peninsula remained what it had always been, a place apart, life in the shadows of centuries. Imagine the changes that have swept through the outside world since the first monks settled here. Empires rising and falling, cities built and destroyed, ships crossing oceans unknown to the ancients. Yet on Athos, the changes are subtler: a new fresco in a chapel, a repaired stone wall, the planting of an olive grove where a thicket once stood. The monastery bells ring now much as they did 1,000 years ago. The chant melodies are the same prayers are whispered before meals, the same psalms sung at night vigils. Time here is not entirely still. Roofs must be mended, paths cleared, young monks trained in the old ways, but it moves in a slower, smaller arc, circling back on itself rather than rushing forward. The sea as a boundary, the sea is both the monastery's protection and its link to the world. Supplies arrive by boat: flour, oil, candles, paper, wine, and occasionally visitors. Yet the same waters discourage intrusion. Storms can isolate the peninsula for days, even weeks. In winter, the waves crash against the cliffs with a force that makes landing impossible. Some monks rarely, if ever, leave their monastery grounds. Others travel the paths to neighboring houses for feast days or joint services, but all remain within the invisible boundary set by the mountain and the sea. The purpose of silence in the outside world: silence can feel like absence, an empty space waiting to be filled. On Ethos, silence is presence, it is a discipline, a constant companion, and a kind of teacher. Monks here speak when necessary, but words are weighed carefully. Most of the day passes in the sound of footsteps on stone, the rustle of robes, the sweep of a broom on a monastery floor. For a newcomer, the quiet can be unsettling at first. Without the familiar noise of city life: carts, merchants, music, shouts, the ear grows sensitive to smaller sounds: the tapping of a chisel in the workshop, the trickle of water in a cistern, the crackle of olive wood in the kitchen hearth. This perhaps is the essence of Athos: the slowing down until even the smallest sounds and changes in light take on significance. The holy mountain has stood through more than 1,000 years of storms, both natural and political. In this section, we have only stepped onto the shoreline and walked the first paths into its quiet interior. But how did such an isolated community manage to survive through Byzantine intrigue, Ottoman rule, and the turbulence of the modern age while keeping its traditions intact? You said. Section 2: The slow calendar of Silenci. You have been here for some months now, perhaps a year, though the distinction has already begun to blur. The seasons still change, though they do so in a way that feels distant, almost irrelevant. The monastery is not immune to time, but it does not bend itself to the same tempo as the world outside. This is not simply because of the silence, though the silence is part of it. It is the rhythm of tasks, the constancy of work, and the deliberate absence of urgency. When you arrived, the senior monk, whose name you were not formally given, though you overheard the novices calling him Brother Edric, had explained the daily schedule with the same tone he might have used to describe how one stacks kindling for a fire: practical, unembellished, and certain. The bells mark the hours, he told you. They do not ask you to hurry, and so the bells became your clock. They rang at matins, in the black hours before dawn. They rang at prime, when the pale gold of morning seeped through the frost-slick windows. They rang at sext, when the sun, high in the sky, reminded you that the body must eat. And they rang at vespers, when daylight retreated into the blue hush of evening. But between those bells, the long unbroken stretches of quiet labor, you began to notice something. The hours did not always feel equal. Some seemed to stretch endlessly, as though the air itself had thickened, while others slipped away unnoticed, carried off by the rhythm of repetitive work. The work of a day. Tasks assigned to you were simple enough in description, but they carried with them a weight of repetition that became both exhausting and comforting. In the mornings, you might join the garden monks, kneeling in damp earth to weed rows of leeks and cabbage. This was work that had been done every spring for centuries, perhaps in almost exactly the same way. At other times, you would be called to the scriptorium, where the scribes sat hunched over vellum pages, copying lines of scripture and commentary with an exactness that allowed no room for haste. Even if you could write with speed, the work demanded slowness. The letters must be even, the inconsistent, the spacing exact. It was here that you began to feel the deep pull of monotony. The copying of a single chapter might take an entire day. Your mind would wander, not to great visions or revelations, but to the small, irrelevant details of life, the creak of the bench beneath you, the faint smell of parchment, the way the quill made a soft scratching sound that seemed over the hours to become almost musical. And yet there was a strange satisfaction in these tasks. Nothing you did was urgent. There was no pressure to finish in the modern sense. The work existed for its own sake, as it had always existed. The outside world slips away, and of the older monks, a weary man whose hands bore the calluses of decades in the gardens told you, in the only full sentence you had heard from him so far, the world forgets us faster than we forget it. It struck you as a cryptic remark at the time, but as the days passed, you began to see the truth in it. At first, you still thought of the world beyond the walls. You wondered what month it was in the cities, whether trade ships had come into the harbor, what political disputes might be unfolding in the court of the king. But as the monastery's routine absorbed you, those thoughts became less frequent. News did arrive, sometimes carried by travelers who stopped at the guest house for a night or two, but it was never urgent and it was never complete. By the time it reached the cloister, it was already old, stripped of the urgency that might have once made it exciting. You came to realize something quietly unsettling. The monastery did not need the world outside to exist, but the world outside did not need the monastery either. Both could continue, entirely unaware of the other. The measured decay of building stone of the more exciting events of that year, if you could call it that, was the replacement of the roof over the south cloister walk. The old wooden beams had been slowly warping for decades, allowing rainwater to seep through in certain places. The damage was not sudden, but the decision to repair it was made in the same way that the monks did everything slowly, and only when the necessity was undeniable. Watching the roofers work was perhaps the liveliest thing you had seen in months. They were not monks but hired craftsmen from a nearby village, and they spoke freely to one another as they worked, their laughter sounding almost startling in the cloister. You found yourself lingering near the work, pretending to be on some errand, just to hear voices that carried the cadence of the outside world. When the work was done and the roof was whole again, it was as if nothing had happened. The beams would last another century, perhaps two, and that would be that. The repair was not a story. It was simply part of the long, continuous process of keeping the monastery alive. The records no one read in the archive room, a cramped, dusty chamber lined with shelves of bound manuscripts. You discovered a record book. It was not a theological treatise nor a register of notable events. It was quite simply a list. Line after line recorded purchases, repairs, deliveries, and weather observations. The handwriting changed over the years, but the tone did not. One entry from more than a century ago read, "Received 6 cartloads of stone from the quarry at Flint Hill. Rained heavily in the afternoon." The next page jumped ahead 50 years. The west wall was repointed with lime mortar. A hen went missing from the yard, found later. There was a dullness to these records that made them strangely compelling. This was history, but stripped of drama, a record of life as it truly was, made up of repairs, weather, and small inconveniences. You realized that in another century the new roof beams would also be recorded in this way. Nothing more than a line in a ledger that no one would read unless they were searching for something else. A year measured in small things. When you first arrived, you had thought of a year as something that passed in great arcs: summer, autumn, winter, spring. But here the year revealed itself in smaller increments. The first frost, the first lamb born in the pasture, the day the stonemason returned to sharpen the cloister's worn steps. You began to notice the ways the monks marked these events. They did not speak of them as milestones, but you could see it in their habits: the extra care taken to cover young plants in early spring, the way they stood a little longer by the fire when the first snow came. It was in these details that time lived here. The large events, coronations, wars, discoveries, did not enter. The monastery moved according to its own slow, steady pulse. The question of permanence: be the end of your second winter. You began to wonder something that you had never considered before. Could the monastery outlast entire civilizations? It seemed possible. Kingdoms might rise and fall, trade routes might shift, new languages might emerge, but as long as there were men willing to rise at matins, till the gardens, mend the roofs, and copy the texts, the monastery would continue. You found yourself imagining the building hundreds of years in the future, perhaps with none of its current monks still alive, yet still following the same schedule, still ringing the same bells. It was not eternal, of course, nothing is, but it was far more stable than the fleeting arrangements of the outside world. And so the question lingers as the year draws to a close: if the monastery forgets the world and the world forgets the monastery, which is truly the one that disappears? You said. Section 3: The quiet weight of years. If you have followed the story this far, you have already walked with us through the slow, deliberate passage of centuries in the cave of the seven sleepers, through the quiet breath of limestone walls, the muffled echoes of a forgotten city outside, and the strange immobility of men caught between two times. Now we reach the final stretch of this history, a moment when centuries of stillness gave way, not with a storm or a war, but with a single, almost casual act: the decision to step outside. The awakening, as recorded in various retellings, was not accompanied by any great trembling of the earth. There was no blinding light, no roaring wind. The men simply opened their eyes, and for them perhaps only a single night had passed. But in reality, 309 years had been quietly tucked away behind them, hidden like a folded page in the long book of human history. The air outside the cave was different, not the same crispness of the century they had left behind. It carried other scents: the faint tang of new markets, new streets, new kinds of bread baking in clay ovens. The city that had once been a place of tension and persecution had transformed into one of tolerance and safety. And perhaps most curious of all, the very faith they had risked their lives for had now spread far beyond its early boundaries, becoming the law of the land. For most people in the city, life moved along in its normal way. Farmers still brought figs and pomegranates to market. Merchants still argued over the weight of copper coins. Children still ran through narrow lanes, their laughter skipping across stone walls. But for the sleepers, every detail was a quiet shock. Even the coins in circulation were strange, not the familiar engravings they remembered, but images of rulers who had been dead for centuries. The most remarkable part of their return was how quickly the city embraced them. Stories spread, first through whispers, then through formal announcements, that the seven sleepers had been preserved by divine will. They were a living bridge between the persecuted believers of the past and the flourishing faithful of the present. People traveled from surrounding villages just to see them, to hear their voices, to touch the garments they wore. It is difficult to imagine the inner thoughts of the sleepers at this point. Did they feel relief, confusion, gratitude, or was it an uneasy mixture of all three? To awaken in a time when your struggle had already been resolved, your principles already vindicated, and your enemies long forgotten, it must have been both a comfort and a strange emptiness. There was nothing left to fight for. The accounts suggest they did not live long after waking. Perhaps their bodies, frozen in unnatural rest for 3 centuries, could not sustain the rhythm of daily life for long. Or perhaps they had already completed their purpose in the grand story of the city and its faith. Whatever the case, their passing was not a tragedy to the people of the time. It was seen as a closing of a chapter that had been miraculously preserved. The cave itself became a place of pilgrimage, not hurried, not crowded, but steady, a trickle of travelers who would climb the slope, stand quietly at its mouth, and reflect on the enormity of what had happened there. The bones, if indeed they were there, were treated with reverence, though many accounts differ on whether they were ever visible to the public. The site became a silent teacher that the span of human life is small compared to the patience of time, and that beliefs worth holding can outlast the centuries themselves. The most enduring lesson from their story is not the supernatural aspect, though that is the part most remembered in religious texts, but the way history quietly reshapes the world in our absence. We think of time as something we walk through, step by step, but time walks without us too. A city can turn from fear to freedom, from division to unity, while the individuals who first sparked that change are absent, asleep, or gone entirely. And so the cave of the seven sleepers rests in the cultural memory, part legend, part recorded event, part lesson. Whether one approaches it through faith, through historical curiosity, or through the lens of human endurance, it remains a gentle but persistent reminder: the world you fear today may not exist tomorrow, and the truths you defend may grow roots far deeper than you will ever see. Which raises a quiet question, one worth carrying into the next story. If you could step forward through centuries as they did, skipping all the toil and uncertainty, would you? And if so, how would you face a world that no longer remembered the fears that once shaped you? You said. Story 3, Section 1. The City of Lamson, the days before electricity. When the night was something the world simply accepted, cities slipped into darkness after sunset. Streets were empty save for the glow of a candle in a window or the rare shimmer of moonlight on wet cobblestones. But in one city, London, the darkness began to thin, not all at once, but in the steady bloom of small amber lights. The first gas lamps, as simple as they were, felt like a kind of magic. Tall iron posts rose along the streets, their glass lanterns shaped like inverted tulips, each one containing a steady flame-fed glow. The light was warmer than the silver of the moon, softer than the blue flicker of a tallow candle, and it spread further than either. For the first time, the night no longer belonged solely to those who moved in shadows. It began modestly in the early 1800s, just a few streets lit as an experiment. People gathered to watch the lamplighters at work. These men carried long poles tipped with a small flame, and with a practiced gesture, they would lift the light to the lantern's mouth and awaken it. The hiss of gas, the faint whoosh as it caught, the sudden bloom of gold, it was a performance repeated hundreds of times each evening, one lamp at a time. There was resistance, of course. Some argued that the lamps would disturb the natural order, keeping people out longer than they should be. Others feared that the gas itself, invisible, unfamiliar, might be dangerous. But soon the advantages became impossible to deny. Shops stayed open later. Carriages could travel more safely. Even the city watch found their patrols less hazardous. The psychological shift was subtle but profound. Night was no longer a thing to be hurried through, it was now something you could linger in. Couples strolled beneath the glow. Newspaper boys shouted headlines into the illuminated air. For the first time, you could see the shape of a building's upper windows after sunset, the gentle details of stonework, the pattern of wrought iron balconies. Still, the lamps did not change the city in a single night. They spread slowly, street by street, like the turning of pages in a long book. And in those early years, there were still pockets of darkness, alleys where shadows pooled untouched, corners where the glow could not reach. But in the mind of the city, something had shifted forever. The night had been softened, tamed, made almost inviting. And so London began its transformation into the city of lamps. The light was not just a matter of safety or convenience. It was an announcement that this was a place where the future might be coaxed gently into the present, one small flame at a time. Section 2. The lamplighters route each evening, just as the last streaks of daylight faded over the rooftops. The lamplighters emerged. They were quiet men, dressed in thick coats to fend off the chill, their boots leaving hollow echoes on the cobblestones. Each carried the same tools, a long brass pole with a tiny flame at its tip, and a hook for turning the valves that fed the lamps. Their work had a rhythm. At each post, they tilted the pole upward, found the small hinged door in the lamp's glass, and touched the flame to the waiting gas. Hiss, whoosh, a flower of gold bloomed instantly, its glow pushing back the shadows. Then they would twist the hook to adjust the gas, ensuring the light burned steady but not wasteful. It was a job that required no hurry but also no pause. In the space of a few hours, an entire district would change from the dark gray of dusk to the gentle gold of a lit evening. People sometimes followed the lamplighter for a while, treating him almost like a traveling performer. Children tried to guess which lamp would be next. Shopkeepers stepped out to watch their own stretch of street come alive. The lamplighter was a strange figure, both essential and invisible. Everyone benefited from his work, yet few knew his name. On winter nights, when fog crept in from the Thames and clung to the city, his task became even more magical. The light would spill into the mist, creating glowing orbs that hovered in the air like ghostly moons. Carriages moved slowly then, and footsteps were muffled, but the lamps still shone, marking a path through the haze. There was a kind of poetry to the route, not just in the act of lighting, but in the order of it. Certain streets always came first because their shops stayed open later. Others were done in reverse on Saturdays to guide crowds leaving the music halls. In this way, the lamplighter knew the city's moods better than most. He knew where lovers lingered, where thieves preferred to hide, and which lonely windows always seemed to have a single candle burning inside. And every morning before the first gray light of dawn, the same men returned, retracing their steps in silence. With the hook end of their pole, they closed the valves, snuffing the flames, one by one. The city once again was handed back to the sun. Story 3, Section 3. Shadows beneath the glow. For all their warmth, the gas lamps did not banish danger, they only shifted it. The pools of light they cast were small, leaving long stretches of darkness in between. To walk through London at night was to pass from brightness into shadow again and again, each patch of dark carrying its own weight of uncertainty. Thieves learned to use the lamps to their advantage. A well lit street meant better visibility, yes, but also clear views of pockets being picked or purses snatched. Criminals sometimes lurked just beyond the circle of light, waiting for footsteps to approach before melting forward with practiced precision. The light also had a strange way of deepening the city's contrasts. Wealthy neighborhoods gleamed under a close-spaced chain of lamps, their glow reflecting off polished brass knockers and freshly swept steps. Meanwhile, poorer districts had lamps fewer and farther between, their posts leaning at odd angles, their glass panes clouded from years of neglect. Then there was the matter of the gas itself, invisible by day but silently dangerous. Accidents happened. A valve left half open could leak into a house, filling it with a sweet metallic scent that was often ignored until it was too late. In rare cases, a faulty lamp could flare too hot, shattering its glass and spitting sparks onto the wooden eaves of a nearby building, and yet the city accepted these risks. Gaslight was too great a symbol of progress to question too loudly. It meant safety for some, convenience for others, and for many a subtle thrill, the kind that comes when something entirely new becomes part of the everyday. Still, those who lived beneath the lamps knew the truth. The glow was not complete protection. It was a guide, not a shield. The darkness still belonged to London. It simply shared its stage with the light, you said. Story for Section 1. The first flicker long before gaslight became a fixture of the streets. It was an experiment in cramped workshops and cluttered laboratories. The earliest demonstrations were small, almost private affairs, a handful of onlookers gathered around a pipe feeding gas to a single flame, watching as it burned steady and bright. In 1807, one of these demonstrations spilled onto the streets of London. Engineer Frederick Windsor had been campaigning for years to convince the city of Gaslight's promise, and now he had a chance to show it. On a winter's evening, he arranged for a short stretch of Pall Mall to be lit entirely by gas. It was not subtle. Windsor wanted spectacle. Pipes ran from a nearby reservoir of coal gas, feeding upright lamps whose flames were fed by invisible currents. The moment they ignited, people stopped in their tracks. The light was cleaner than oil lamps, stronger than candles, and it had an almost alien steadiness. Where a flame usually wavered, this one held its ground, casting sharp-edged shadows and a strangely modern glow. There was curiosity, yes, but also suspicion. Some muttered that the gas smelled odd, or that it might explode. A few refused to walk beneath the lamps, convinced the flames could drop embers onto their clothes. But others saw only the future, streets where night could be almost as bright as day, where trade and travel might extend far beyond sunset. Windsor stood nearby, watching faces tilt upward. In that moment, he was less an inventor and more a showman, selling not just a technology but a vision of a different kind of city. Section 2. Convincing the city. Night after Windsor's Pall Mall experiment, the newspapers were quick to respond. Some praised the display as a marvel of modern ingenuity, proof that London was stepping boldly into the future. Others were skeptical, questioning the cost, the safety, and whether such light was even necessary. After all, the city had managed for centuries with little more than oil, tallow, and moonlight. Windsor knew public opinion alone wouldn't be enough. He needed powerful allies. That meant convincing city officials, merchants, and property owners that gaslight wasn't just a novelty, it was good business. He spoke of safer streets deterring crime, of longer shopping hours boosting trade, and of the prestige that came with being at the forefront of progress. Still, doubts lingered. Coal gas had to be manufactured and piped through the city, a messy, smelly process that some compared to building a network of chimneys underground. There were whispers about fires and explosions, and rumors that the very air near a gas lamp could be unhealthy to breathe. Windsor countered with carefully staged trials. He lit warehouses, theaters, and factories, letting people see for themselves how the light transformed a space. Merchants noticed that goods looked more appealing under its steady glow. Theater owners found audiences lingering longer in well-lit foyers. Slowly, momentum built. What had once been a street-side curiosity was starting to feel inevitable. The city could resist for a while, but not forever. Section 3. The glow spreads. B. 1813. London's first official gas company, the Gas Light and Coke Company, had been founded, with Windsor at its helm. What began as a short stretch of illuminated street now grew into a network of pipes beneath the city, branching outward like roots seeking new ground. At first, only prestigious areas received the upgrade: grand avenues, theaters, and wealthy districts where the light would be most admired and could be paid for. Gas lamps stood tall and elegant, each crowned with a glass globe that protected the flame from wind and rain. They didn't just brighten the streets, they changed their mood. Nighttime, once a time of uncertainty, began to feel safer, more open. For shopkeepers, the effect was immediate. Their windows glowed like beacons, drawing in customers who would have otherwise hurried home before dark. For the working class, it meant longer hours both for leisure and for labor. The city's heartbeat shifted, no longer tied so strictly to the setting sun, but the glow came with a cost. Gasworks belched smoke and stench into the air, and the faint hiss of escaping gas could be heard in some quiet streets. Still, the promise outweighed the drawbacks for most Londoners. Other cities were watching, and soon they too would follow. Windsor's dream had taken hold, the night itself was changing, and once the first flicker had been lit, there was no going back. You said, Story 5, Section 1. The silent streets before the arrival of gaslight. London after sunset was a city transformed, and not for the better. The narrow streets, already crowded and crooked by day, became a maze of shadow and uncertainty. Pools of lamplight from tallow candles or smoky oil lamps flickered weakly, leaving most alleys in darkness. Travelers moved cautiously. The wealthy hired link boys' children carrying torches to guide them home for a few coins. Those without the means relied on the moon or else stayed indoors altogether. In the poorer districts, darkness was both a cloak and a cover. It hid honest folk hurrying home and those who meant them harm alike. Night was the realm of watchmen, who patrolled with lanterns and rattles, their calls echoing through the sleeping city. Yet even they avoided certain streets where danger lurked behind shuttered windows and in unseen corners. Merchants locked up early, theater crowds scattered quickly after the final curtain, and the city seemed to hold its breath until morning. In such a world, the idea of turning night into day seemed less like progress and more like fantasy. No one yet imagined that within a few decades London's nights would be as bright and as busy as its days. Section 2. The first flickers. The change began quietly, almost experimentally. In 1807, along Pall Mall, London saw its first public gas lamps. They burned with a steady amber glow, brighter and more reliable than oil, though the light still wavered slightly when the wind shifted. Passers-by stopped to stare. Some muttered about the smell, a faint, sulphurous tang, and others about the strange, hissing sound the lamps made. The technology had been proven elsewhere. In 1792, William Murdoch in Cornwall had used coal gas to light his home and workshop, delighting his neighbors and intriguing engineers. But bringing gaslight to the streets of London required more than clever engineering. It meant laying miles of iron pipes beneath the cobblestones, constructing gasworks to produce the fuel, and convincing a skeptical public to accept this new illumination. Not everyone was convinced. There were fears that the pipes would explode, that the gas would poison the air, or that the constant brightness would disturb natural rhythms. Horse-drawn carriage drivers complained that the glare spooked their animals. Even so, the convenience was undeniable. Streets lit more evenly, shops staying open later, and crime, at least in theory, reduced by the watchful glow. By the 1820 seconds, the network of gas pipes spread rapidly. Wealthier districts embraced it first, their elegant terraces bathed in warm light. Working-class neighborhoods followed more slowly, often receiving only a few lamps at main intersections. The city's evenings began to hum with a new kind of life: strolling couples, late-night deliveries, the sound of boots on pavement long after sundown. Gaslight didn't just brighten the streets, it lengthened the day. Bakers could work through the night, printers could run presses into the early hours, and theaters could keep audiences lingering longer. London was beginning to discover that light was more than a convenience, it was a form of power, and yet, as with every innovation, there were those who wondered what might be lost when darkness retreated. Section 3. A city transformed. By the middle of the 19th century, gaslight had woven itself into the very identity of London. The once muted streets now glowed after dusk, their amber halos reflected in wet cobblestones after a rain. Theaters, music halls, and taverns thrived under its steady light, drawing crowds that would have once hurried home before nightfall. The change was more than visual, it was cultural. Darkness had once dictated the city's rhythm, but gaslight extended the hours of business, leisure, and labor alike. Shop windows gleamed into the night, tempting passers-by with goods they might never have seen in daylight. Newspaper presses clattered through the small hours, and the docks worked late into the evening, illuminated by tall iron lampposts that stood like sentinels. For some, this was the dawn of a more modern, prosperous London, but others lamented the vanishing of the quiet, intimate evenings they had known. Poets complained of the loss of mystery. Naturalists warned that perpetual light disturbed birds and plants. Even crime adapted where darkness once offered cover for thieves. Now the glow allowed pickpockets to better size up their targets. Still, there was no turning back. The city had discovered that light could bend time, stretching the day in two. The night, and in the decades to come, another, even brighter revolution, the electric bulb, would push back the shadows further still. Gaslight had not just lit London's streets, it had changed the way its people lived, worked, and even thought about the night itself, you said. Story 6, Section 1. The Age of the Great Plague. In the spring of 1665, London felt strangely still. It was the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, though in this case, the storm was not made of wind or rain, but of something unseen. The air grew heavy with rumor of strange swellings, of sudden deaths, of carts carrying the dead through narrow lanes at night. The first cases were small enough to ignore. A tailor's assistant in St. Giles fell ill, a few neighbors followed, but the city had seen sickness before and life continued. Merchants called out their wares in the marketplace, taverns poured ale in 2 mugs, and the bells of St. Paul's still told the hours. Then came the summer heat. With it, the illness spread like wildfire through the crowded, unwashed streets. The plague did not creep. It leapt. Houses were marked with a red painted cross and the grim words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." Families were shut inside, the doors nailed fast. Those who could flee, the wealthy, the connected, left the city for country estates, leaving behind a population trapped between fear of the disease and fear of starvation. By June, the death toll climbed daily. Bills of mortality, once glanced at casually, became objects of dread. The plague pits, deep, hastily dug graves, began to fill, and still the sound of the dead cart rattled along the cobblestones each evening, the driver's voice calling, "Into the dark, bring out your dead." This was not just another outbreak. This was the beginning of one of London's darkest years. Section 2. A city under Segaby. August of 1665. London had become a city in mourning. The air hung heavy with the sour scent of lime from hastily sprinkled plague pits, and the smoke of tar fires burned in the streets in a futile attempt to purify the air. Silence reigned where once there had been clamor, no market cries, no laughter spilling from taverns. Only the tolling of church bells marked the passing of another day. Those who remained lived under a kind of siege, though no army surrounded the walls. The enemy was everywhere, in the touch of a hand, the closeness of a crowd, the breath of a stranger. Parish watchmen guarded the doors of plague houses, ensuring no one escaped. The red crosses on the doors were a death sentence, marking families to be shunned and avoided. The poor suffered worst of all. With work gone and trade at a standstill, many turned to begging or scavenging in the streets. But even the most charitable hands withdrew in fear, dropping coins from a distance rather than risk contact. Rumors swirled of cures and charms, vinegar-soaked sponges, smoke from burning herbs, amulets worn close to the skin but none proved effective. Physicians in their long-beaked masks moved like dark birds through the lanes, carrying canes to prod the sick from a safer distance. Each night the dead carts still came, their wheels rumbling through the darkness, lanterns swaying, and in the silence that followed, the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next knock at the door. Section 3. The Blackismont. September brought no relief, only death in greater numbers. In some parishes, whole streets lay empty, their doors swinging in the wind, the inhabitants long since carried away to the plague pits. The toll of the dead reached thousands each week. The death bells rang so often they seemed part of the city's breath, a mournful rhythm to which all life now moved. At night, the city was darker than ever before. The taverns had shuttered, the theaters were closed, and even the watchmen's torches seemed dimmer. The only lights came from the lanterns of the dead carts and the candles flickering in windows where someone lay dying. Many clergy, physicians, and apothecaries had fled, but some stayed either out of duty or because they had nowhere else to go. Their bravery was matched by the quiet courage of neighbors who risked their own lives to bring food or water to the stricken. Yet these acts were rare. Fear had made the city colder than any winter. The plague itself seemed almost merciless in its swiftness. A man could wake well in the morning, be taken ill before noon, and lie dead before nightfall. Swellings the size of eggs rose in the armpits and groin. Fevers burned. Delirium took the mind. In these blackest months, it was hard to believe the city would ever recover, but the wind would change, and the plague, like all storms, would one day pass. Until then, London endured, cloaked in sorrow, waiting for the sound of bells to fall silent again. Story 7, Section 1. The Frost Fair of 168 for the winter of 1683 to 84 was unlike any in living memory. By Christmas, the River Thames had frozen solid from bank to bank, its surface locked in a glittering sheet of ice. The frost came so suddenly and so hard that ships lay trapped midstream, their masts rising like bare trees from the frozen expanse. Londoners, at first astonished, soon found opportunity in the bitter cold. Tent stalls sprang up on the ice there, canvas walls snapping in the wind. Merchants sold hot pies, roasted meats, and mugs of steaming ale, their breath puffing in the frigid air. Printers even set up presses on the frozen river, selling souvenir pamphlets to commemorate the great frost. Children skated and slid across the ice, shrieking with laughter, while musicians played fiddles and drums to keep the crowds warm in spirit if not in body. Even the king himself came to witness the marvel, riding out onto the ice in a grand carriage to the cheers of the crowd. Yet beneath the gaiety, the cold carried its own dangers. The poor huddled in rags, their fires never quite warm enough. Food grew scarce as trade along the river ceased, and the ice claimed more than one careless life when a crack opened suddenly beneath the weight of revelers. Still, for that one strange winter, London forgot its troubles and turned the frozen Thames into a carnival. The Frost Fair became a legend, a shimmering memory of merriment born in the heart of the cold. Section 2, Deepening Cold. By late January, the frost showed no sign of breaking. Day after day, the sun rose pale and weak over a city sheathed in white. The Thames lay buried beneath snowdrifts so deep that the river's surface looked more like a frozen meadow than a highway of water. The Frost Fair swelled in size. New stalls appeared each morning, bakers with steaming loaves, trinket sellers hawking charms against the cold, fortune tellers wrapped in shawls thick as carpets. Oxen were roasted whole over great pits in the ice, the scent of charred meat drifting over the wind. Even gambling tables appeared, where dice clattered and coins changed hands beneath the watchful eyes of constables. But away from the music and laughter, the frost was a cruel master. In the narrow lanes of Southwark and the East End, frostbite gnawed at fingers and toes. The homeless sought shelter under the bridges, where ice crystals formed even in the shadow of the piers. Coal prices soared, and many went without fire. Rumors began to stir that the ice might hold until March, that the river had frozen deeper than any man could remember, that strange sounds, groans, and cracks were sometimes heard beneath. The fair, a few superstitious souls claimed the river was restless, that it did not take kindly to being turned into a marketplace. Still, each day the crowds returned, stamping their feet to keep warm, their laughter mingling with the muffled creak of ice underfoot. The fair had become more than a diversion. It was London's answer to a sea. Section 3. The thaw. It came without warning. In the first days of February, the air softened and a fine mist curled over the city. By midday, rivulets of water began snaking across the white expanse of the Thames, dark lines etching their way through the fairground. Stalls that had stood firm for weeks began to tilt as the ice beneath them sagged and groaned. The change spread quickly. Cracks rang out like pistol shots, sharp and sudden, followed by the deep, resonant rumble of ice shifting in great sheets. Merchants scrambled to drag their goods to the banks. Children were hauled away by anxious parents, their skates still laced tight. The roasted ox, half eaten, was abandoned mid-feast. By evening, wide black channels of open water gapped where the morning had been solid ice. A few unlucky souls were caught too far from shore. Most were pulled to safety, but not all. The river, so long subdued, had reclaimed its place. The Frost Fair was gone within days. In its place, the Thames ran brown and swift once more, carrying away splinters of timber, scraps of cloth, and the last of the fair's bright bunting. Yet in taverns and parlors, people spoke of it for years afterward, the year the river froze, when London danced and drank on its back, and when winter, for a brief moment, felt like a festival. Story 8, Section 1. The night of the falling starset was the night of November 12, 1833, when the sky over North America caught fire. In the quiet hours before dawn, farmers, sailors, and city dwellers alike awoke to strange light flooding their windows. Above them, meteors poured from the heavens in a dazzling, unbroken rain, not a few streaks, but thousands, tens of thousands, flaring and dying against the black. From the streets of New York to the open plains of the frontier, people stood in their night clothes, necks craned, mouths open. Some dropped to their knees in prayer. Others ran through the streets shouting warnings of the world's end. Horses shied and bolted. Church bells rang, summoning the faithful to prepare their souls. The air was cold, but no one felt it. The sky seemed alive in motion, as if some great hand were casting sparks from an unseen forge. The meteors radiated from a single point, fanning out like spokes of an enormous wheel. For hours, the display continued, an unceasing, silent storm of light. No one knew its cause. To many, it was an omen. To others, a spectacle so beautiful it could only be the work of God Himself. But whatever the meaning, the night would burn itself into the memory of an entire generation, a night when the stars seemed to fall like rain. Section 2. The search for an explanation. The following day, the panic had begun to settle, replaced by a deep, almost obsessive curiosity. Newspapers across the United States rushed to print breathless accounts, the heavens in flame. While letters poured into learned societies from every corner of the country, witnesses described meteors falling faster than snowflakes. In a winter storm, their light bright enough to cast shadows on the ground. At Yale College, Professor Denison Olmsted read these reports with mounting excitement. While many insisted the event was supernatural, a sign of Judgment Day, Olmsted believed there had to be a physical cause. He gathered eyewitness statements, noting the direction, timing, and intensity of the meteors. From this, he determined that the display was not a local phenomenon but a vast, coordinated shower visible across the entire continent. What puzzled him most was the way the meteors seemed to radiate from a single point in the constellation Leo. If that was true, it suggested something revolutionary. The Earth in its orbit might have passed through a great stream of debris drifting in space. Such a notion was daring for its time. Many still clung to the idea that meteors were atmospheric mere weather of the upper air. But Olmsted's calculations hinted at a different story, one that stretched far beyond the skies of that November night. Section 3. A cycle written in the sky. Olmsted's work sparked a quiet revolution in how people understood the heavens. As his findings spread, other astronomers combed through old journals, ship logs, and monastic records. They found something remarkable. This was not the first great meteor storm. Accounts from 1799 spoke of sailors in the Caribbean watching fiery rain fall into the sea. A 1766 diary from a French missionary in Canada described a night where the stars fled from their places. Even farther back, records from Asia told of similar celestial tempests. The pattern suggested that these storms occurred not randomly, but in cycles, perhaps every 33 years. This idea led to a bolder conclusion. Somewhere out there, a comet was leaving a trail of dust and rock in its orbit, and the Earth, like clockwork, crossed that trail at regular intervals. When it did, the debris entered our atmosphere at tremendous speed, igniting the sky in a meteor storm. In time, this mysterious parent body would be identified as Comet Tempel-Tuttle, and the November display would earn a name, the Leonid meteor shower. But for those who had stood beneath the 1833 spectacle, no scientific explanation could erase the memory of that night. Whether they saw it as the work of God or the mechanics of the cosmos, they had all looked up and witnessed the impossible, and for a few brief hours, the Earth had seemed at the very center of the universe. Story 9, Section 1. Gaslight and the City. London in the early 1800s was a city of deep shadows. After sundown, the streets fell into pools of darkness, broken only by the dull flicker of tallow candles in windows or the smoky glow of oil lamps. The night belonged to the bold, the desperate, and the unseen. Then, on a cold January evening in 1807, a small crowd gathered along Pall Mall to witness something extraordinary. At first, they noticed only a faint glimmer in the distance, but as it drew nearer, the street began to glow, a steady golden light spilling across the cobblestones. The source was a row of gas-powered lamps, their glass globes shining with an almost supernatural clarity. The effect was immediate and almost unsettling. Some onlookers gasped, others crossed themselves, and a few muttered that it was unnatural witchcraft in glass. Yet merchants saw opportunity, and city planners saw a way to tame the dangerous darkness that had long ruled London's nights. By the end of the decade, gaslight had spread through parts of the city, replacing the fickle flame of oil with a light that burned bright, clean, and constant. It was more than an invention. It was a promise that the modern city could, at last, claim the night as its own. Section 2 Night becomes a marketplace as gaslight spread beyond Pall Mall. London's nights began to change in ways few had predicted. Shopkeepers, once forced to close at dusk, now kept their doors open late, their goods gleaming invitingly under steady light. Coffee houses and theaters thrived, drawing patrons who felt safer venturing out after dark. The city's great markets extended their hours, and streets once feared for their shadows now bustled with evening trade. A new kind of economy emerged, one built on the promise that the day no longer ended with the sun, but with light came other changes. Criminals, long shielded by darkness, found fewer hiding places. Constables reported drops in certain kinds of street crime, though not all. Some thieves adapted, slipping into the bright lit crowds where they could vanish in plain sight. For the working poor, gaslight was both a blessing and a burden. Longer hours meant more wages but also more exhaustion. The city glowed, but it also demanded more from those who kept it alive. And still, in poorer districts where gas pipes had yet to reach, the old darkness lingered, a reminder that the light was not for everyone, at least not yet. Section 3 A city reimagined. By the mid 19th century, gaslight had become part of London's identity, as defining as its fog or the chime of Big Ben. Public celebrations were now bathed in golden brilliance, with long strings of lamps turning processions into spectacles. Theaters glittered inside and out, their facades glowing like jewels in the night. For writers and painters, this new illumination was both inspiration and challenge. The city no longer disappeared into shadow after sundown. Instead, it shimmered, with contrasts, glowing streets against dark skies, polished light reflecting off wet cobblestones. But the glow was not without its critics. Some argued that London had lost a certain mystery, that the softened edges of candlelight and shadowed alleys had been replaced by something too mechanical, too uniform. Poets lamented the vanishing of the true night, while others warned of gaslight's hazards, leaks, explosions, and the ever present smell. Yet for most Londoners, the transformation was undeniable. Gaslight had redrawn the city's rhythm. Blurring the boundary between day and night, it was a visible declaration that London was not just surviving the dark, it had mastered it. The end 309 years later do not remember falling asleep. One moment the air inside the cave was heavy with the smell of stone and damp wool. My head rested on my folded arm, the last flicker of sunlight retreating from the mouth of the cavern. My companions had already surrendered to slumber, their chests rising and falling in unison, as if drawn by a single breath. We had fled for our lives. The king's decree echoed in my ears even as sleep wrapped around me. Bow to the idols or face the sword. I remember the fire in our hearts, the trembling in our hands. We had chosen the cave over compromise, darkness over disobedience, and then nothing. A dawn unlike any author, a voice, perhaps mine, stirs me awake. How long have we slept? I ask the others. My body feels both weightless and heavy, as if the bones inside me are made of mist and stone all at once. My mouth is dry, my skin is cold. One day, says Mixelmina, rubbing his eyes, or part of a day. The others nod. No one questions it. The light at the cave's entrance is sharper than I remember. Not warmer, sharper, like a blade that cuts through the dimness. I step outside and shield my eyes. The sky feels bluer, impossibly so, as if the very pigment of creation had been deepened while we slept. I expect to see the familiar road winding down the hill toward our city. I expect to hear the clang of the marketplace, the bleating of goats, the distant hammer of the blacksmith, but the road is gone, swallowed by weeds. The stones of the path are cracked, grass sprouting from their seams. The first stranger we decide to send him like a to the market to buy bread. He wraps our old coins in a cloth and descends the slope. His figure disappears into the foliage, and we wait. The silence is strange, no passing caravans, no smell of smoke from morning fires, only the wind moving like a whisper across the hills. When Yamlaika returns, his face is pale, his hands shaking. The bread he carries is unlike any I've seen, rounder, softer, wrapped in fine cloth. They would not take the coins, he says. They said they are ancient. They asked where I found them. Behind him, several men appear, dressed in robes of colors I do not know, their belts woven in patterns alien to me. Their speech is familiar and foreign at once, the tongue of our fathers, but softened, twisted, stretched by centuries. Who are you? One asks. I open my mouth, but the answer sticks in my throat. The city of Ghosti lead us to the city. I am certain we will find our families, our neighbors, perhaps the king's soldiers waiting to finish what they began. But as we enter the streets, my knees weaken. The walls are taller, made of cut stone, so precise I cannot see the seams. The roofs are tiled in colors like jewels. Water flows in carved channels along the road, not muddy streams, but clear singing water. Faces turn toward us, curious, cautious. No one I know, no one who knows me. We pass a market, but the scents confuse me, fruits of shapes and colors I have never seen, spices that sting my nose. The coins they trade are not ours. Their measures and weights are strange. One of the men whispers to another. I catch the word mujiz, a miracle. The truth unveiled in the courtyard of a great building. An elder approaches. His beard is white, his eyes bright as polished amber. He speaks slowly, clearly, as if to children. You are the companions of the cave, he says. The sleepers, you fled the tyranny of Decius, the idol worshipper. Allah caused you to sleep, and now, brothers, 309 years have passed. The number shatters in my mind like glass. 309. The sun has risen and set over our cave more than 100,000 times. Empires have risen and fallen. Our language has changed. The earth has shifted beneath us. We are not fugitives anymore. We are relics, a faith preserved. The elder tells us the people here worship none but Allah. The persecution we fled is a memory. Long buried, the idols are dust, their temples collapsed, the Quran has been revealed. Our story, our very flight into the cave is part of it. We are a Yaz living and breathing, proof of the resurrection. I glance at my companions. Some weep silently, others stare at the ground, as if afraid that looking at this new world will erase the one we left. The pull of the cavity offer us a place among them, homes with beds softer than lamb's wool, food rich with honey and milk, but something inside me resists. My heart is still in the hills, in the darkness of the cave. That night I slip away from the city. The moon is high, and its light spills like silver across the path. The cave's mouth waits for me, unchanged, eternal. I step inside. The air cool against my skin. The stone still remembers the warmth of our last fire. My blanket lies folded where I left it, the dust of centuries settling like fine snow. I hear footsteps behind me, my companions. One by one they enter, their faces calm. No words are spoken. We lie down, each to his place. The final sleepy. Close my eyes. This time the sleep is different, not the heavy pull of exhaustion, but the gentle hand of completion. The world outside is safe. Our mission is done. If Allah wills, we will wake again, but not here. Not in this world of clay and shadow. Reflections beyond team. I do not know if what happened to us was for the people then or for the people now, for the city that found us, or for every heart that hears our tale. But I know this, to sleep in. The protection of Allah is not loss of time, it is preservation. To wake in His promise is not confusion, it is clarity. To be cut off from the world is not exile. It is mercy when the world would pull you from the truth. We were seven when we entered the cave, we are seven still. But our number is carried now by every soul who chooses faith over fear, truth over comfort. And if you ask me how long I slept, I will tell you the truth, a day or part of a day. You emerge, blinking against the light of a world that has forgotten your name. The streets are paved differently now. The language has changed in small ways. Familiar words carry unfamiliar meanings, and unfamiliar words slip past your ears. Like foreign birdsong, the currency in your hand is useless, its weight no longer matching the value it once held. For a moment, you stand at the threshold of the city, the hum of life in front of you, the silent shadow of the cave behind you. The wind smells different, less of wood smoke, more of open markets and distant spices brought by ships you have never seen. People glance your way, some pause to stare. Your clothing is wrong, your beard too wild, your eyes holding a strange depth that only centuries of stillness could carve. You are not merely a stranger. You are an echo of a vanished time. In their faces, you see curiosity, suspicion, and perhaps a quiet they have heard the story of the seven sleepers there. Parents told it in whispers by the hearth, their elders spoke of it as a parable of faith and divine mystery. But they never expected to see one of those sleepers, flesh and blood, standing in the dust of their streets. As you try to speak, your voice feels strange, like a long forgotten instrument being played again. Words stumble, then flow. Questions spill from you. What became of the city walls? Where are the men who once ruled? Do the old laws still stand? Their answers are gentle, but they fall on your ears like rain on old stone. The kings are long gone, their empires dust. The wars you feared are forgotten. The prayers you whispered in darkness have outlived the rulers but have changed their form. And as you listen, you realize something. You are not here to reclaim your place in this world. You are here as a witness to carry the memory of the past into the hands of a people who never knew it. You walk slowly back to the edge of the city, turning once to look over the rooftops, the domes, the winding streets. The sound of life carries on, merchants calling, children laughing, hammers ringing on metal. Life has no need to remember you to keep moving forward, and that strangely brings peace. The cave calls you again, not as a prison, but as a place where you left a part of yourself. You step inside once more, feeling the cool air wrap around you. The darkness feels softer now, not like an end, but like a quiet waiting place. You lie down just as you did before, the stone beneath you firm and familiar. Outside, the world will keep changing. Inside, time will remain still. And perhaps centuries from now, someone else will find the cave and wonder about the people who slept here, and whether they too might close their eyes and awaken to a different world. The thought lingers as your eyes drift shut, not fear, not longing, just the quiet understanding that all things, empires, languages, even memories are carried forward by others when we can no longer bear them ourselves, and in that surrender there is rest. The cave of the seven sleepers, final chapter. The silence before waking thee lay in stillness, a stillness so deep that even the passing centuries could not disturb it. For 309 years the cave had held them like a cradle. Outside, empires had risen and fallen, kings had been crowned and forgotten, roads had been built over the dust of older roads, and tongues had shifted in shape and sound. But within these rocky walls, time had moved differently. The seven young men had not known the measure of their long sleep. To them, the darkness behind their eyelids had been no deeper than a single night. It began centuries ago, in a time when the city at the cave's foot was ruled by a king who demanded loyalty not only to his crown but to his gods. The seven youths, bound together by friendship and a shared faith, refused to bow before the idols. They spoke in whispers, for their defiance was dangerous. And when their refusal became known, they fled the city, seeking safety beyond the reach of the king's guards. Their feet carried them to the edge of the wilderness, where a small cave opened in the rocky hills. Here they decided they would hide. One of them went down to the market for food, returning with bread and a few coins still in his pouch. They prayed, asking for God's protection, and lay down to rest, thinking they would rise before the sun touched the cave's mouth again. But instead of dawn, centuries came. The world outside, changed world beyond the cave, had not waited for them. The stone roads they once walked became paths for strangers. Armies marched across the hills they had known as boys. The language they spoke had drifted, reshaped by the tongues of traders, conquerors, and scholars. The coins in their pockets became relics, their stamped faces of old rulers, now the curiosity of children. The city below had changed too. The king they had feared had been replaced long ago, and with him the old laws that once punished their faith. What they had been forced to hide was now openly celebrated, and yet in the quiet darkness the seven sleepers knew none of this. The awakening had began with a faint stirring, a breath, the twitch of a hand, then slowly eyelids lifted, one after another. The sleepers awoke, rubbing the heaviness from their eyes. "Have we slept long?" one asked, stretching stiff limbs. "Perhaps a day," said another. "Two at most." The one who had gone for bread before they slept looked toward the faint glow at the cave's entrance. "I will go to the market," he said, his voice still hoarse. "The others should rest. I will bring food." He picked up the same pouch of coins and walked down the familiar path. But the path was not the same. Trees stood where none had stood before. The stones of the road had been rearranged, and the city gates, they were taller, broader, and made of heavy wood banded with iron. The people were strangers. Their clothes were of strange cut. Their speech was his language, yet not quite certain words bent in unfamiliar ways. He clutched his coins tighter and stepped toward a baker's stall. The baker looked at him strangely. where have you found these? He asked, picking up one of the coins. From my own purse, the sleeper replied, confused. The baker shook his head. These have not been in use for I cannot say how many years, perhaps 300 IV. The realization word spread quickly. A crowd gathered, whispering and pointing toward the stranger in old fashioned clothes with his ancient silver coins and bewildered eyes. Soon the city's elders came to question him, and it was then in their hall of polished stone, beneath a roof he did not recognize, that the truth began to take shape. They spoke to him of history, of kings whose names he did not know, of battles that had reshaped the land, of laws changed and faith restored. They told him how long it had been since men like him had walked these streets. The number was impossible. 309 years. The sleeper's heart raced. If this were true, then everyone he had once known, every friend, every relative had long returned to the dust. His home was gone. His own time was gone. I must tell the others, he said. We the return to the Kavi climbed the hills again, each step heavier than the last. The city's noise faded behind him until only the wind in the grass remained. When he reached the cave, the others saw the change in his face before he spoke. It is not as we thought, he told them. We have not slept today. Nor, too, we have slept for centuries. There was silence, a long, deep silence. One of them lowered his gaze to the stone floor. Another closed his eyes as if in prayer. They understood then that the world outside was no longer theirs. They were visitors from a vanished age living proofs of a miracle, yet strangers in the land of their own birth. Vi. The last rest story says they returned to their places in the cave, their hearts at peace. They had fled the world for the sake of their faith, and God had preserved them until the world itself had changed. One by one they lay back against the stone. The air in the cave was cool, the darkness soft and complete. They closed their eyes. Again, not in fear this time, but in contentment. And so they passed once more into rest. The legacy long after their second sleep, the cave remained. People came to see the place where the seven had lain, to touch the stones and whisper prayers. Their story was told and retold in markets, in mosques, in churches, crossing languages and borders. In each telling, the heart of it remained the same, that faith is greater than fear, and that time, vast and relentless as it may be, is still held in the hand of the one who made it. Closing reflection extended. If you stand at the mouth of that cave today, or any cave anywhere in the quiet hills, you might feel the same wind they once felt. You might hear the same rustle of grass, the same call of distant birds. The world has changed since their time, and it will change again after ours, but some things remain untouched: the turning of the earth, the light of the morning, the stillness of night. Think of them, sleeping in the dark while centuries passed above. Think of how small our own days are in the great stretch of time, and how precious. In the end, perhaps their story is not only about a miracle of survival, but about the way every life is brief, and every moment is a chance to hold to what matters. And as you close your eyes tonight, know that the same stars that watched over them shine still over you. The same keeper of time holds your days, just as he held theirs. The world will turn, empires will rise and fall, generations will come and go, but the one who wakes the sleepers in his time will wake us all.